Okay, we got 20 minutes. Let's see if we can do something here. This is a new Sicha. We spent 3. It takes us. We've been learning Nebuch. The Sichas have been suffering so much.
Is it short?
It's not so short, but we're reading from it. It's short. It's 8 pages long. Don't get fooled. The last 3 classes were on one Sich in Chele Gimel about Makas B'Chayris. The spirit of that class was very mystical. It was about the fact that the death of the firstborn, that plague, that Makkah, involved opposites. It wasn't only about punishment, it was also about healing. In order to do opposites, you have to have a very deep source. Pardon me. This Sikha is a much simpler Sikha. This is a Rashi Sikha, actually. It's rich. There's always, Rebbe's words are always rich. But on a technical level, it's a Rashi Sikha. Okay? So let's create context. Let's put ourselves into a little bit of a box. The context is Yidna going out of Mitzrayim. They went into Mitzrayim for a reason. They lived in Mitzrayim for a reason. They dealt with Mitzrayim for a reason, and now they're leaving. And their departure is very, very, very dynamic. It's not a simple, smooth walking out of the country kind of thing. It's one miracle after another, one plague after another, and as we've discussed at length, so much of this is not just punishment, but education. Right? Hashem is announcing himself to the world. Those 2 years or so was a period of time when Hashem showed off. He just showed off, which is uncharacteristic. Hashem hides. Hashem hides not because he likes to be concealed, because he wants this world to be ours and not his. And that our relationship with him should be ours and not his. Yetzias Mitzrayim, the entire Exodus account, the entire story of the Exodus is the violation of that law. He sort of takes over. He makes it so obvious that he exists that clearly we're going to follow his lead. And so on. So there's 10 makas, 10 plagues. And they teach different lessons, as we have spent a considerable amount of time discovering. We're teaching the same lessons in a variety of different ways. We're holding by the story of the death of the firstborn. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chumash, offhand. But the story in the Chumash is that the 9th plague is the plague of darkness. At the end of the plague of darkness, the Pharaoh summons Moshe Rabbeinu. And it's hard for me to understand how he summoned him if the plague of darkness made them numb, made it impossible for them to move. Somehow the Pharaoh was able to summon Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu comes and he asks him to remove the plague of darkness. And Moshe says he will. And the conversation ends very confrontationally. Very confrontationally. He removes the plague of darkness. And then right in the presence of the Pharaoh, Moshe has a prophecy. Rashi says that as a rule, B'tzeisi Esa'ir, Moshe Rabbeinu would not prophesize, would not experience prophecy in the parameters of the city that was the capital of Egypt. I don't know what city it was. You look in the ancient maps, you can find it maybe. Because it was Malaya Gilulim. It was full of idolatry, full of idol worship. So Moshe Rabbeinu would go outside the city limits or city walls, and that's where he would daven to Hashem, and that's where he would get divine inspiration. Here he's having a conversation with the Pharaoh over the plague of darkness, and in Pare's presence, he experiences a prophecy. The Eibusha says, and he prophesies about the death of the firstborn. Pare gets very upset. Pare gets really, really angry at him. And the Pharaoh says to him, get out of here. Get out of here. And he adds, if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. If I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. Actually, I'm saying it wrong. After the plague of darkness, Hashem, the Pharaoh says to Moshe Rabbeinu, if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. Now, I don't know if this happens at one time or it happens 2 different times. The bottom line is the Pharaoh says to Moshe, next time I see you, you're dead. And Moshe says, you're right, I'm never going to see you again because next time we meet, you're dead. But he doesn't use those words, but that's the implication. And right as he's standing in front of the Pharaoh, as the Pharaoh's had enough of him, Hashem speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu and tells him about the idea, the impending last plague. There's going to be a plague of the firstborn. Now, if you know Chumash, you realize that in the very beginning, the very first prophecy was about the death of the firstborn. Hashem says to Moshe, I'm going to have to kill their oldest children before they let you leave. And of course, what he says first ends up happening last. He speaks about it in Pashas Shmos. Now we're holding in Pashas Bay. So right in front of the Pharaoh, Moshe Rabbeinu has this experience. He says to the Pharaoh, this is it, you're right, party's over. We're going to kill the firstborn and then we're going to leave. And he storms out of the Pharaoh furious. Now they do meet again. Rashi says, Pari gets up in the middle of the night, and of course Amalamdim love to describe his pajamas to us. The pom-poms and the polka dots. I'm not so sure about those little details. And he says, Rashi says, where does Moshe live? Where's just get out? In other words, the next time he meets, instead of killing Moshe Rabbeinu, he says, let's part ways. And then, of course, the Pharaoh a week later follows them into the Yamsuf, and so on. So the last of the 10 plagues is the death of the firstborn, and then comes the Exodus. But there's another whole part to the story. What's the whole part of the story? The additional part of the story. The additional part of the story is what's happening with the Jews, with us, with the Yidden. We understand that the 10 Makis were not just about Egypt, they were about the Jewish people. We had a Sicha where the Rebbe says nothing can happen in this world. It doesn't have a message for the Jewish people. Also, so the 10 Makis also had a message for the Jewish people. But there's another part of the whole story. And that is that before we would leave Mitzrayim, we would have to bring a Korban Pesach. And before we would bring a Korban Pesach, finish the sentence, we would have to do bris milah. We would have to circumcise our sons. Because kol ora lo yechal, it's a strange halacha that if somebody is uncircumcised, not only can he eat from the Korban Pesach, his entire household can eat from the Korban Pesach. So the Jewish people who had a tradition that went back at that point hundreds of years, Avraham Avinu was born 500 years before the Exodus. Avraham Avinu did circumcision when he was 99 years old. So 400 years of tradition about Bris Milah had been forgotten. Jews stopped circumcising their children, maybe to the exception of Shevet Levi. And now in a huff and a puff, in a few days, literally millions of men and boys had to be circumcised so that at a Pesach they did Korban Pesach. And the Torah doesn't really tell it to us explicitly, but it's quite clearly implicit. And what happens is, while Hashem is talking to the Pharaoh, that half of the story, you're right, I'm never going to see you again, I'm just letting you know this is it, party's over, we're killing all the firstborn, and Pari was himself a firstborn, as we know from the Chazal, and then we're going to leave, we're done, we're out of here. And he goes to the Jewish people, and he gives them the instructions about preparing to leave Mitzrayim. Now, the chronology is confusing. In other words, different Mefarshim will tell you different things about what's the pace of the Makis. When you learn in the Chumash, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu about the plague of the death of the firstborn. And Moshe, almost immediately, he's standing right in front of the Pharaoh. He has this vision. He passes the message along to the Pharaoh, right? Did that happen before Mishchu Chu? Did it happen after Mishchu Chu? Did it happen before Hashem gave instructions for the Jewish people about Korban Pesach and Bris Milah, or afterwards? There's an argument to be made that this was literally a week before Pesach. Which means that because Makas Arbe has to happen in Chodesh Shvat at the earliest, because you can't eat vegetation which hasn't grown yet, right? The Mefarshim struggle. What did Arbe do? They ate up all the grains, whatever was eaten, right? Now Barad, hail, also did some damage. Now, Egypt has seasons, right? They're closer to the equator than we are, but they're not on the equator. They have seasons. So how early does it begin to grow? What is the equivalent of spring? February? January? So Barad beats up on the barley, and I forgot the other crop, which means Pishta, Se'era, I forgot the Lashon of the Pasuk. Some crops were sufficiently ripened to be beaten up by the Barad, by the hail. And remember, according to Rashi, there's a month between a plague and a plague. So you have to figure this all out. So the different Mefarshim have very different opinions about this. But Arba couldn't have happened before Shvat, which is basically February. So Choshech has to happen in March. which is basically Adar, right? So when does Makas B'Cheres happen? In Nisan. So how did this all play out? Again, there's different opinions, but some opinions push Arbe forward. You can't have locusts eat up crops that haven't grown yet. So some of the opinion pushed the locusts up to the end of February, the beginning of March, which means that the darkness is the end of March, the beginning of April, which this year is the after Pesach almost. So there are opinions that say that the instruction, the commandment from Hashem to Moshe to tell the Pharaoh about the death of the firstborn happened after the first of Nisan. Which means that the Jewish people, in the Chumash, first you read how Hashem tells Moshe to tell the Pharaoh about the death of the firstborn. Then you read how Hashem tells Moshe to tell the Jewish people about the first mitzvahs, which is the mitzvah of sighting the new moon and bringing the Korban Pesach. But there's an argument to be made that although they're written in the Chumash this way, it actually happened in a reverse order. In other words, conceivably, Moshe Rabbeinu, at least according to some opinions, spoke to the Jews first and to the Pharaoh second. He came to the Jews on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and he said, listen here, people, today is Rosh Chodesh. You see the moon? This is Rosh Chodesh. It's a whole new religion, a whole new calendar. We don't follow the sun because that's normal. We follow the moon because that's loony. The Russian word for moon is loon. We have a Russian representative over here. It's true. It's true. And the reason they call a lunatic is because he barks at the moon. That's why they call a lunatic. In case you didn't know, a lunatic means you're as crazy as the moon. We cycle, okay? So the Eibusha tells Moshe Rabbeinu to tell the Jewish people the first commandment. We have a calendar that's variable. Our calendar is not always the same. Sometimes it comes early, sometimes it comes late. Seasons are unpredictable because you are not just going to get automatic, you're going to get what you deserve. If you deserve more, it's going to come earlier. You deserve less, it's going to come later. And that's what the moon does to the sun, right? It just makes everything a little bit off kilter. And then, of course, the mitzvah of Pesach, and the Jews run to prepare. And sometime in this whole scheme, Makas Choshech happens, the plague of darkness occurs, the plague of darkness finishes, Moshe comes to meet the Pharaoh says, I had enough, next time I see you, I'm going to kill you, and Moshe says, don't you worry, we're never going to meet again. Oh, by the way, there's one more coming, and this is the end of the party, Makas B'Cheres. And you could say it, again, there's different opinions in the Mefarshim how this all unfolds. I'm just sharing with you the fact that if you want to think about it in chronological terms, it does get complicated, and not all the Mefarshim agree to the timeline of the 10 Makkahs. When did the 10 Makkahs begin? And it actually holds that each Makkah took a month. 30 days, a month. 10 Makkahs has to take 10 months, but it seems quite obvious. Makas B'Cheres didn't take a month, it took a minute. Right? But how much warning was there between Makas Choshech and Makas B'Cheres? Some of the Mefarshim hold there was very little warning. It was like the exception to the rule. But okay, having said that, there's two rings to the circus. Right? The first ring to the circus is what's happening with the Egyptians and the Pharaoh, and we discussed that. The other ring to the circus is what's happening to the Jewish people and their preparedness to leave Mitzrayim. So we all know the Haggadah. Right? There are certain things that you have to say in the Haggadah. Some of the things the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, and the Gemara says you have to say in the Vayisanu Haitzi Misham Laman Havi Yisanu Al-Aris Lasas Lanas Aris Ashenish Belasas La Vayisenu. You must say in the Haggadah Shal Pesach, we were taken out of Egypt. The Gemara says, it's not some rabbi who come lately. You have to say in the Haggadah, V'yisanu Haitzi Misham. Amongst the things which are inserted into the Haggadah, and it really doesn't matter where, you just got to put them someplace, is the two psukim which we have in our Haggadah, wherever we have them, but apparently different customs have it in different places. V'ever alayich. Ve'erech mispeiseses b'damoyich ve'emelach b'damayich chayi ve'emelach b'damayich chayi. And then you say the next pasuk. Revova ketzedek ketzemach hasoden esatich v'atirbi v'atigdili b'adi adoyim shadayim nochaynu was orich tzimeach v'ateirem ve'eria. I'm going to translate now in English. These are two different psukim. The first one says, I will pass over you, ve'ever alayich. And I will see that you're mizbeiseses b'damoyach. You're surrounded by, I don't want to use the word immersed, but you're busy with blood. V'aymelach, and I'm going to tell you, b'damayach chayi, because of the blood you're going to live. Twice. V'aymelach b'damayach chayi, because of your blood you're going to live. And there's a custom among some Jews to pour off a little wine from the cup. We don't do it. But there's a custom. My grandfather used to do it, my mother's father. He had the Nusach Sfad customs, and he would pour off a little wine. They do it with their finger. We don't want to use the finger, but we don't do it at all. But the blood represents, the wine represents the blood. You finished. Then you say another pasuk. Revava. Revava means wild grass. Revava also means myriads, thousands of people. Ketzemach hasodin esatich. Like the sprouts from the field, I made you, I gave you. In other words, you grow out of the field. Va'atirbi, va'tigdili, va'tavoi ba'adoy adoyim. And you multiplied, and you grew, and va'tavoi ba'adoy adoyim. You were incubated, you were supported in some way. And then it says, Shadayim nechoinu u'sa'orech tzimeach. It means you grew up, you matured. Shadayim nechoinu means you developed maturity, you grow hair, and so on and so forth. Va'at erein ve'eria, you are naked and bare. You have to say these two psukim in the Haggadah. You have to say there's different customs. You have to say the psukim that speaks about the fact that the Jews live because of blood, and the idea that Jewish people were naked, had nothing. So now, logically, the psukim should be in the other order, because chronologically they happened in the reverse. The reason the psukim are in this order, because that's how it is in Yecheskel. I think it's Kapitel Tezayin or Yud Zayin. The order is that first you have the pasuk, and only afterwards you have the pasuk Revava. So even though l'cha'ira chronologically it should be in the reverse order, this is the order in which the psukim appear in the Tanakh, and this is the order in which we say it. And the Rebbe's Haggadah brings three different ways of how these psukim are said, including one that they're said take in the reverse order because it describes the sequence of events. What's going on here basically is that we're describing the Jewish people's lack of worthiness to leave Mitzrayim. We didn't deserve to go out of Mitzrayim. Why? We were naked. Naked doesn't mean only physically naked. It means we're in mina mitzvahs. The Jewish people in Egypt were slaves. And they were not only slaves that they did work for Egypt, they became part of that world. They were pagans, Rahman al-Itzlan. They were almost as immersed in idol worship as their Egyptian masters. And when it came to Torah and mitzvahs, they were naked and bare, nothing. But there's a detail. What's the detail? The detail is that the Pari was killing the men, the boys, right? And the Rebbe has in the famous Sicha, Bas hi v'choya. It wasn't like he was keeping the girls alive. He was trying to brainwash the girls into the Egyptian way. So he was actually killing them both. The only question was whether he was killing them biologically or killing them spiritually. So the Medrashim say the story. It's truly amazing. Truly amazing. Where the women would seduce their husbands. Right? That those were the copper mirrors, right? The women would seduce their husbands and they would get pregnant. And when it came time to deliver the babies, they went out into the field. Now, if they had a little girl, they took her home. And they had a little boy, they left him there. The Egyptians would keep track of everybody who became pregnant, and they would keep track of the likely time for the delivery of the babies, and they would hunt them down. And they would find these little boys, and they would kill them. So the Chazal say that the women left their boys under the tree, and they would go away, and the earth would swallow them. And the Egyptians would plow the ground, trying to kill these children that had been swallowed up by the earth. And if the Eibishter can swallow a little baby, he can look after him also, yeah? And there would be two stones, as they state in Chazal. And from one stone they would suckle milk, and from the other stone they would suckle honey. And when they grew up, they would grow out of the ground. That's what it means. Revava could mean many, and Revava could mean grass. They would grow out of the ground, and you should know that it's implicit in the Gemara. It's implicit in the Gemara that Tchias HaMesim happens. You know, when you go to a cemetery, you take grass, right, and you rip it out of the ground, you throw it over your shoulder, and you're supposed to say, there's a pasuk which says in effect, V'yotzitzu me'ir ke'esev ha'oretz. You're supposed to say these words. Yotzitzu, they're going to, it means peak, yeah, from the terrain, like grass. They're going to grow out of the ground. There's an implication. It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, which talks about Tchias HaMesim. This is one of the many psukim that they bring. You almost get the impression when a person dies, you're planting them. And with Tchias HaMesim, you leave a seed, which is the etzem luz, and then they grow out of the ground, however you want to explain it. But in Mitzrayim, when they would reach an age of maturity, they would grow up. They'd come home. They knew how to find where they belonged. I don't know, by, the way penguins recognize each other by sound or by smell, I don't know how. And they would come home literally naked, with no clothes. No clay, big boys. So this is, and we say, you have to say this in the Haggadah. You have to say this in the Haggadah. And of course, this is one of the greatest miracles that ever happened. Imagine that. But the reason we're saying it in the Haggadah is not only to underscore the miracle, is to observe how when it came time for us to leave Egypt, we didn't have a lot to go on. We had Chosavas. The reason we left Mitzrayim because we had very, very holy Zaydis. What about us? We were slaves in Egypt. And the reason we say this pasuk is to make the point: V'at erein ve'erya, you were naked and bare. You have nothing good about you. We didn't have any mitzvahs, and therefore, before we left Egypt, the Eibishter gave us 2 mitzvahs, both involving blood. And faket, b'damayech chayi, the blood gives us life. It doesn't chas v'shalom take life. What are those 2 mitzvahs? The dam Pesach and the dam Milah. The blood of the circumcision, the Jews had to circumcise themselves, and then subsequent to that, the blood of the Korban Pesach, which they would bring a few days after. And this was our schus. If we were going to leave Egypt, we needed merits, we needed schusim. Now, in the end, we didn't deserve it. Kibarach Am, right? It's not like Mashiach that we paid. It was in effect undeserved. Our greatest merit was that we had Heilige Zaydis. Honestly, our greatest merit was we had holy ancestors. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Those are good reasons to get out of Mitzrayim, if you understand what I'm saying. But we had very little merit. But we had these 2 mitzvahs. And all the Jewish people collectively did these 2 mitzvahs. Both connected to blood. I mean, you understand the connotation. It makes you uncomfortable just to say that word. And the point, of course, the spirit is that it's a costly mitzvah, right? A mitzvah that involves blood is costly. Even though in one case, it's not your blood, it's the blood of an animal. But the idea that it's meant to convey and meant to inspire, these were not just stam mitzvahs. They were the kind of mitzvahs which would take us out of the condition of va'at erein ve'erya, you are naked and bare, and put you into the category of b'damayech chayi, because of your blood you live, because of your blood you live. And again, we say the psukim in the Haggadah in the wrong order. We say the second pasuk first. First we describe how we went out of Mitzrayim with the chus of dam, and then we say how we didn't deserve it. In a lot of Neschais, from what I understand from the Rebbe's Haggadah, they would say it differently than we do. And again, this is 2 psukim that are just plopped in the middle. You got to say it by the Seder. Where you say it doesn't matter so much. You have to say, when we left Mitzrayim, we were Eir and V'yadi, we were totally undeserving. And the Eibishter gave us 2 mitzvahs involving dam, and in that chus, the Jewish people were able to leave Mitzrayim. That's the spirit, okay? Now this Sicha talks about those 2 bloods. Okay, we'll do it next week.